Welcome to Women Atheists UNLOAD on Skeptic Haven channel. To a audience that is watching us now, thank you and welcome. It is a show by women, but it is for everyone, where we explore controversial topics with a critical, non-religious perspective. Today, we're diving into the doctrine of discovery, a concept rooted in a series of papal decrees from the Catholic Church in the 15th century. These edicts justify European claims over new lands, endorsed the subjugation of indigenous peoples, and laid the groundwork for the transatlantic slave trade. Join us as we unpack how these historical doctrines continue to impact society and challenge the narratives that shape our world. Stay tuned and let's question history together.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh- I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh- I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another episode of Women Atheists Unload. My name is Cynthia, and today, again, joining with me is Miss Stephanie. Stephanie, hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Cynthia?
I'm doing well. Well, today is going to be a very interesting topic, coming off of the Independence birthday of the United States that was recently passed on July the 4th. How old are we now, Stephanie? Do you know? I forgot
How
to do
old are
my
we? I
calculations
forgot
of
to
like
do the
how
math.
old the United States are. Here, let me see if I can bust out my calculator real quick. Okay, let me see. Like the founding is what 1776, right?
1776.
Okay, and then like we're going to minus that by 2024. That's the year of our Lord, 2024.
That's the one.
You're
Anno
right.
Domini.
Yes, yes. Okay, so we are approximately now 248 years old. Wow, look at that. Isn't that something? But Stephanie, I think that we both know that even though like the United States in itself is 248 years old, the some of the premises of the founding of the nation, even like when we talk about the New World, was actually years and years. I wouldn't say over 200 years before that. Would you agree?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I mean,
Mm.
1619 was when the first Africans were brought into Virginia and actually, I believe, South Carolina first
Mm.
as slaves.
Yeah, actually,
So, yeah,
that was the first slave ship from England. We actually had,
that's right. There
yeah,
were
African.
from Barbados. The Barbadian planters
Mm-hmm.
resettled in the Carolinas primarily and brought
Mm-hmm.
that entire system to
Mm-hmm.
which got its start in 16.
In the
That got its
16.
start in 1648, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And then, but we also had like a history of actual Africans coming over through the transatlantic slave trade, at least about over 100 years before that. And we're going to talk about today, as we discuss, the doctrine of discovery. That whole thing about saying, hey, I found it, I discovered it, it's mine. That's basically what the doctrine of discovery is. But I think that like maybe it should get more of an academic definition. Would you agree?
I think it probably should. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, let's see. So if we talk about the doctrine of discovery, it is a doctrine. Well, we can first talk about the relevance that it has today. So it's still relevant today because it continues to impact not only these here United States, but also the Western Hemisphere, and especially indigenous communities and the influence of land appropriation. And the doctrine was actually used by Spain, Portugal, and England to justify the colonization of many lands, including North America, and to claim indigenous lands. It denies the validity of indigenous governance and also sovereignty systems, and has led to injustices in water rights, in oil and mineral extractions, and broader and border and immigration policies. And the doctrine has also been cited in court cases such as City of Sherrill versus Oneida Indian Nation of New York in 2005, where the Supreme Court ruled that the Oneida Nation could not regain sovereignty over the land taken by New York State. And the doctrine of discovery also can help people understand the context of the ongoing suffering and the imbalance of power between countries, and why efforts to create a just society fall short in 2023 and 2024. And even though that we have a repudiation of in 2023 from the Catholic Church when it comes to the doctrine, stating that it upholds the inherent human rights of indigenous peoples, we have still yet to find actual, I would say, the meat and potatoes of actually making indigenous people and those who have been affected adversely by the doctrine of discovery whole. So I'm going to actually step back here, because the doctrine of discovery actually is a series of papal bulls that was put out in 1452, 1455, and 1493. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and give the floor over to Stephanie. Stephanie, did you want to go over the Dum Diversas of 1452?
I don't have that one. The one that is, I think, most pertinent
Mm-hmm.
to and the one most cited
Mm-hmm.
in later jurisprudence and later Western jurisprudence is a papal bull that was published by uh, Pope Alexander VI in
Yeah.
1493,
Yeah,
the year after.
that's the
Inter
cetera.
intercetera.
Yeah.
We often use the phrase etc. Well, this is intercetera, which
Mm.
means between things,
Mm-hmm. Well,
amongst other things.
let me just
So
like
that's
I'll just give like a complete like a quick summary of the first
great.
two papal bulls that I was actually released by Nicholas V. Okay, before we actually go into the intercetera. So Doom Diversa. So we crew just want to before we get into the age of exploration, let's go ahead and take that down first, because I'm going to go over these first two and then we're going to move on. So Doom Diversas. I need to go over back to my Latin pronunciation. I took, Latin diction very, very long ago. Oh my goodness. But anywho, but that's a papal bull that was issued on June 18th of 1452 by Pope Nicholas V. It actually authorized Alfonso V of Portugal to conquer the Saracens and pagans in a disputed territory in Africa, and consign them to perpetual servitude. Yay, supremacy. Okay. And then we have the Romanos Pontifex of 1455. And it is one of the it's actually a significant series of papal statements of the 15th century that charge Portugal with the task of investigating the coast of Africa with a view to finding an alternative route to India, with securing this route by establishing naval bases and with spreading the Christian faith. The bull praises the successes of Henry, the navigator of Portugal, and in the struggles against the Saracens, and in spreading Christianity. It also grants Portugal, I believe that is suzerainty over the territories acquired thus far and over future conquests beyond Cape Borjador, a headland on the northwest coast of Africa and south of the Canary Islands. And the bull ordered that Christianity be propagated in the newly conquered territories also. And I'm going to let you go ahead and go from here. Stephanie, tell us by Inter Cetera of 1493. You're muted, love.
I have this. I have the papal bull Inter Cetera of May 4th, 1493. And you all may recall that Christopher Columbus returned from his first voyage on March 4th, 1493. So he didn't waste time. He wrote a letter to the sovereigns of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, and another letter to the Pope. And what he hoped to do was, in the light of the fact that the Portuguese had been granted uh, rights for the propagation of the faith in the lands basically east of the Canary Islands and Cape Verde Islands. He wanted to be sure that that he, Christopher Columbus himself, who wanted to be governor of all of the lands he discovered on behalf of Ferdinand and Isabella, would have dibs on anything elsewhere. And that's what this bull did. But it also made a broad claim for all of Christendom, which is to say that you could, if you, if a Christian nation discovered lands uninhabited or unclaimed by other Christian nations, everything in it, including the people, belonged to that sovereign. And that sovereign could do whatever that heck they wanted to with the lands, the people, etc., so long as they were propagating the faith. This is also set in the context, by the way. Let's not forget that the Muslim province of Grenada wasn't extinguished by the Castilians until the early 1490s or late 1480s. So the Reconquista of the other event that happened in 1492, aside from Columbus discovering the Bahamas, you know, and claiming the Greater Antilles, the other thing that happened was the Spanish kicking the Jews and the Muslims out of Iberia. The extinguishment, basically claiming all of that land. So this all fits into a piece of we've gotten the Muslims out, we've gotten the Saracens, Muslim Saracens, basically same idea. And so the Pope is very interested in getting his mitts on whatever revenues would be coming out of Spain, out of Portugal, on the new territories claimed. And this whole notion of European, what began as European rivalry against invaders from Africa, which goes all the way back to Carthage, I suppose.
Right.
It is really percolating in the late 14th and late 15th, early 16th centuries. And it gets worse in the 17th century. So anyway, this is the papal bull.
Mm-hmm.
And the salient things are, well, clearly informed by Columbus's letter and whatever additional information the Spanish monarchs may have provided, etc., must first and foremost be seen and understood in the context of a series of papal bulls, which you covered there. And this is, again, about the right of contest. But scrolling down, she covered that. We'll go to the bull itself. And this is probably we've heard, of course, this is the bull. We've heard, of course, that though for some time you had intended to look for and find certain remote and unknown islands and mainlands heretofore undiscovered by others, in order to return their local population. You see, there's this presumption that all the world is Christian. They just forgot. Have you heard this in apologists' arguments? In does this stop? This language is as old as the 1490s. In order to return their local population and inhabitants to the worship of our Redeemer and to the profession of the Catholic faith, you are not able to reach the intended goal of their sacred and commendable plan, as you are until now most occupied with the conquest and recovery of the kingdom of Grenada. You see, this is what's in their minds right now. Everybody's got to realize people are people. They don't change. We're the same as those guys were. We're all thinking in local context. And in order to understand history, it's important to understand local context. Anyway,
right.
Enough of my bullshit.
You're fine.
As it pleased the Lord, wishing to know your desire, you designated our beloved son, Christopher Columbus, a man certainly worthy and most highly commendable and suited for a lack of this magnitude.
Oh, so commendable. So commendable.
Oh, yes. Incredible. Together with ships and men equipped for such an undertaking under the greatest hardships, dangers, and expenses, and carefully search for the remote and unknown continents and islands of this kind across the sea, where no one had ever sailed before, with the help from above and of utmost perseverance. While sailing the ocean, these men found certain very remote islands and even mainlands heretofore undiscovered by others, and inhabited by an abundance of people who live peacefully and go naked, as we are assured, and don't eat flesh. And the peoples themselves who dwell in the aforementioned islands and lands believe, as your aforementioned envoys have reason to assert, that there is one God, the Creator in heaven, and they appear to be ready to embrace the Catholic faith and to be imbued with good morals. And if they're instructed, there's good hope for an easy introduction to the name of the Savior, our Lord Jesus Christ, in said lands and islands. And the aforementioned Christopher has already arranged for the construction and erection of a sufficiently fortified outpost on one of the main islands, which he left in the custody of certain Christians who came with him, and who ought to search for other remote and unknown islands and mainlands. On those islands and lands already discovered are found gold, spices, and an abundance of other precious things of various kinds of qualities. Hence you proposed, after careful consideration of all things, and in particular with regard to the exaltation and dissemination of the Catholic faith, as is befitting Catholic kings and princes, and the tradition of your ancestors, kings of illustrious memory, to subject said mainlands and islands and their local population and inhabitants with the help of divine grace, and to bring them back to the Catholic faith.
Wow, that is. Give me a moment, Stephanie. That's sobering. That's sobering. Can we kind of talk a bit more about the role of the Catholic Church and how it was so intertwined with the governments, the monarchies of that time period, right? I got an article that I'm sharing right now. I don't know if you guys actually see it. I want to read a little bit about it. This is from PBS, from the American Experience, that actually talked a little bit about this. So I'm just going to read just a little bit of this, and then, we can kind of talk a little bit more about it. But according to this, it says that the Roman Catholic Church in medieval Europe, for centuries, the Catholic Church straddled the world of medieval Europe. Every king, queen, knight, serf, and soldier lived and died within the embrace of the Catholic faith. The church was not simply a religion and an institution, it was a category of thinking and a way of life. In medieval Europe, the church and the state were closely linked. It was the duty of every political authority, king, queen, prince, or city councilman, to support sustain, and nurture the church. With notable exceptions, the church reinforced the political authority of the states, and the states reinforced the authority of the church. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and just stop right there because I know that, like, in that paper bull, you did kind of just talk a little bit about Ferdinand of Aragon and also Isabella of Castile, which were the monarchs that financed the expedition to the Western Hemisphere, thinking that they were actually trying to find a new trade route to India and China. Was it just India, or is it India and China?
They always spoke of the Indies, but I believe that they were talking of all of the lands that were available. They obviously knew of China because of the Silk Road,
Right,
and Marco Polo and all of
right,
that.
right. Um,
So that,
yeah,
but but the biggest things that they were interested in were
right.
spices and fabrics.
hmm Right. And yeah, so they basically had like um anything and everything, if you really just think about it, as far as like that time period is concerned, had to be basically, ran through by the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, especially the Pope and his what do you want to call it? The Congress of Cardinals, is would that be a fair assessment?
The college of
The
cardinals. Yes,
College
that's
of
what they
Cardinals,
to this
yes.
day. That's what they go by.
Right, right, yes. I get
Very
those mixed
collegiate.
up. Yeah, very, very collegiate of them. I feel university all over them. Um, but that basically at that particular time period, as PBS actually noted, that there was no separation of church and state. I mean, if you really think about it, when we get to forming the United States, that notion of separating church and government is fairly new at that time, because Europe did not know that case. Even if you think about the separation of England, or the United Kingdom specifically, from the Catholic Church when Henry VIII was king, you still had the setup of the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, Episcopal Church here in the States, that was still very much so one with the government. I mean, remember, it was, and it is still that way to this day. King Charles is the head of the Church of England, and he is
And
considered the head of
still
state.
carries the title that was first
Yes,
given to Henry VIII,
that's right.
Defender of the Faith. He
Defender
was
of the faith.
defender of the faith. He was a
hmm
good Catholic monarch, but he
hmm
had an itch in his nuts, so he and wanted to marry somebody else. And he asked the Pope to give him an annulment. The Pope said no, and Henry said, "Hey, take a hike. I'm the defender of the faith in
Right.
England."
Right, in England, right, exactly. So, I'm just going to start my own stuff just so I can go ahead and marry my mistress, because she said that she'll give me a son. And this other chick that I'm with right now, she ain't giving me nothing but daughters, and we can't have that. But yeah, it's just I absolutely interesting how you had this integral politics and faith per se, that actually was intertwined together to actually what would you say, like, really like play out politics to the point where we're even seeing like this political theater that was happening with the doctrine of discovery, with these papal bulls and Ferdinand and Isabella saying, "Go ye forth, Christopher Columbus," even though they were Spain and you're Italian, but that's neither here nor there. You still are going to be able to carry the agenda that we have forward, which is going to be conquest of the New World. Pick up from there, Stephanie, because I see your
Well,
mind
yeah,
grounding.
no, that's kind of where they're at. That's where European Christendom is.
hmm
And when it comes particularly to English, the doctrine of discovery was obviously uh, most meaningful when it was first introduced to the Spanish and Portuguese,
Right.
because the Portuguese had already sailed the Cape Verde Islands, and places on the African coast, and all the way over to Goa in India, uh, and the Spaniards had just discovered. I mean, listen, the Spaniards had just conquered the Kingdom of Grenada, the last remnant on the Iberian Peninsula of the Umayyad Caliphate that had controlled the area since the what 9th century, 9th,
Yeah.
10th century, something
I
like
think that
that.
we still had a western portion of the Roman Empire, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and so there's this entire heritage in Christendom. And as feudalism developed with the fall of the Romans and the rising of various kingdoms through Europe, really the kings claimed and claimed their power by the grace of God.
Right.
It says on the coinage of our neighbor to the north, Deo gratia rex. Carolus, whatever 3 is in Latin, which I forget. My Latin is older than yours.
That's
But
all right. I can
only
always
by
call.
virtue of
It's
only by,
okay. If we need to get, like, some type of getting straight really on Latin, I'll call my mom. She'll get us all straight out together.
which by
But
the
yeah,
grace of God came. And
yeah,
so and who dispenses the grace of God in the unified Christendom that existed before Martin Luther and before the schism of the English Church and the Pope?
it's Catholic Church.
The Pope.
Yeah, yeah,
So when the Pope makes a ruling, the Pope is like the ultimate arbiter between the kings as to where are the dividing lines, what can you do, what can't you do when it comes
hmm
to new lands that don't have Christians in them.
right,
And the Pope said, "You find them, you keep them, so long as no other Christian sovereign." Now, Christian effectively meant European.
yeah,
It could have meant a Christian sovereign in other locations, but effectively it meant European.
right,
And Christianity was the touchstone
mm,
of of at least in English tradition.
hmm
Christianity was the touchstone.
right.
The change to race came later.
Correct. Because, like, one of the things that I've pointed out on other streams that I've been on is that there was no such thing as race until the 1680s, 1690s. And it started right here in the United States. Before, what was considered civilized was if you were and here specifically was an English Christian landowner, and only people who can own land at that particular time were English Christian men. Full stop. So it wasn't, even though, like, we can definitely say, especially when we look at the edicts specifically from Nicholas V, and also from was crap, I forgot his name already. Alexander the Sixth.
Alexander the
Yeah,
Sixth.
Alexander
Alexander
the
the
Sixth.
Sixth.
All right,
By
I
the
don't know.
way, Nicholas V, I believe, was Alexander's uncle. This is how
Hmm.
again we're talking about families here. We're talking
Yeah.
people. These are
Oh
people
yeah.
like you and me, like everybody in the audience. And if you put yourself in their place
Hmm.
and imagine their I know it's hard. I think Dr. Josh talks about this all the time. We tend to the take things out of context.
Hmm.
We don't take the time to understand the context, and that argument comes back to bite you in the ass when people talk about slavery.
Right.
It's still wrong. You know, it's still wrong,
Right.
but there's a rationale for it
Hmm.
and that's not an excuse. People, in order to do horrible things,
Hmm.
you have to make up some rationale for
Right.
doing the horrible thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean,
And
but
it helps if God tells you do the horrible thing. So
exactly. And remember, like, the Pope is considered the voice of God on earth. He
the
has a
vicar of
direct,
Christ.
thorough line. Yes, he has a direct, thorough line to the throne of heaven, Stephanie, if you didn't know. He
I did know.
has the 411. Like, he has a direct telephone AT&T line, my bell, to the throne of heaven. Okay? And
It's a
so
good
the
thing.
yeah, it's, I'm saying, like, he called
High speed
AT&T back in
internet,
the day.
high speed internet connection. It's
Right.
like,
The fiber optics are plugged into Jesus, is what we're saying. Okay. And they were able to, dial him up and tell him what you want. He say, like, yo, God, Jesus, Mary, we need some clarification. So we want to go ahead and discover some things, and we want to go ahead and take over some things. So, I need your divine inspiration to tell me exactly what to write, because I am your representative on earth. And that's why we got the paper bulls. It's interesting how, when you look at the Doom Diversas, the Romanus Pontifex, and the Intercetera, is that these particular papal bulls said that when you're going, especially like the Intercetera, that, when you're going into these particular lands, please keep in mind that the people that are there are not people. Okay, they're not people. They are pagans, they are non-Christians, they are heathens, and they are not bathed in the blood of Jesus. Okay, and therefore that gives you absolute right and absolute divine measure when it comes to being able to take their lands, discover it, and then conquer it in the name of the Lord. I'm going back into my Roman Catholic days, and it's for the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish. It's so
well,
interesting.
Alexander the Sixth is basically saying that what our mission is to cause them to recall the Lord above. They believe in one God. They've forgotten somehow, and we just need to
Remind
remind
them,
them
right?
of the Lord above, and
Right.
introduce them to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and then
Yeah.
it's fine. But they're part of the land. They're no different than a person. I won't say citizen. A
Mm,
person living in uh, Castile or Aragon. Those
mhm,
people are the property of the monarch. They belong to the king or the queen. They
mhm.
belong. They didn't have. They weren't citizens. Citizen is a 17th and 18th century invention.
Right. Right.
The
Thanks,
concept of
America.
citizenry.
Hmm.
They were not citizens. They were subjects,
Right. Right.
and they were subjects of the king, and the king
Right.
was a subject of God.
God. That's right.
And sometimes in Protestant countries, well, that's me and God, you and me, babe,
Right.
and
We're
and
here.
and 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 other places, you and me and the Pope, babe. you know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that we have the dichotomy between the institution of slavery under the Spanish and Portuguese and the
Mhm.
institution of slavery under the English
Right.
had some rather interesting uh, uh, dichotomies, shall we
Hmm.
say.
Yeah, but we
And
know.
part of that, I think, has to do with the fact that there's no pope involved. There's no pope in them. There's no middleman here. You don't
Yeah.
have to look at these. You don't have to look at these. Like you don't have to look carefully at Intercetera, where the Pope says,
Hmm.
"Oh, they've just forgotten God." They
Right.
know there's only one God, but they just forgotten.
Right.
And if we introduce them to Christ, then blah 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 blah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, one of the things that, like, since like we're talking about like the movement of the doctrine of discovery in of itself and how it's used when you are removing the Pope per se, even though like you say you have the same type of practices, you have the same type of belief system, and hell, if you've been to an Anglican church, I grew up in one. There's not much difference as far as ceremony is concerned. Okay,
No,
still a lot of bells, a lot of smells, a lot of wafers, and a lot of wine. Okay,
it
Manischewitz.
gets worse.
It does get worse. Can we talk about how now the doctrine of discovery was also used here specifically to
Oh,
move? I mean, not only in law, but let's talk about manifest destiny. Can we talk about manifest
let's talk
destiny?
about manifest
Let's
destiny,
talk
and
about
let's talk about law too,
yes, yes. Let's talk.
because
Okay,
the
yes,
doctrine of discovery was literally cited by Chief Justice John Marshall
yes, it was.
as giving permission to the United States government to remove Indians
That's right.
and resettle them.
That's right.
It
Exactly.
was it's in a case, and I didn't that was on my list of things to do to this program, is to cite that case specifically.
Right.
But it's literally in a case. John Marshall refers to inter cetera,
Hmm.
refers to the document
That's right.
as as a tradition of of common law.
Well,
Common law being European law.
let's hold on to that because we have precedent of inter cetera used by the Supreme Court specifically from 1823 all the way up until 2005. You know,
Mm,
yeah. But before we go,
mm,
yeah, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. But before, like, let's but before we're working on the timeline here.
yeah,
So
that's true.
yeah, we're working on the timeline. So if we're looking at the doctrine of discovery, it was also the inspiration in the 1800s for the Monroe Doctrine, which declared U.S. hegemony over the Western Hemisphere, and manifest destiny, which American expansion westward by propagating the belief that the American expansion westward and the U.S. specifically was destined to control all land from the Atlantic to the Pacific and beyond. And I just would like to tell our dear audience out there that the Pacific is an ocean. Specific means something completely different. Now,
To be specific, yes.
I'm being specific about the Pacific. So come on, let's talk about a bit. Let's talk about your boy John Marshall. Can we talk about him a bit? I'm gonna give that to you. I'm gonna give that to you. Go ahead.
I didn't really. I that's a topic I really didn't delve into. I can probe my memory banks to see what I can remember. But
Well,
John Marshall actually was
I tell you what.
in a case of Worcester v. Georgia. This is
Mhm,
probably the most famous case of a conflict, and this is rather topical as well, in a
mhm.
conflict between the executive and the judiciary. In case you didn't know, Andy Jackson was a stone cold racist and hated Native Americans, hated
What? I did not
them.
know that.
Yeah, Andy Jackson, Old Hickory was not a nice guy,
No, he
and
wasn't.
particularly not, and that made him very very popular among the folks that wanted the Indian land.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
So the case was Worcester v. Georgia, and there were Christian missionaries who went into Cherokee land and were trying to proselytize in Cherokee land. The Cherokees were saying, "Look, man, go away,"
Mhm.
and they passed a law that sovereign territory, sovereign native territory. They
Mhm.
passed a law that said, "We ain't no English, ain't no U.S. users coming in and settling in our land. Get out."
Mhm.
And the state of Georgia said, "Bullshit, we're moving in."
Mhm.
And uh, and these Christian missionaries said, well, that's, they were good Christians, that they were what you might call allies. They said, well, that's not really quite fair. They want us here. They invited us here and blah, blah, blah. So they sued, the state of Georgia sued them. They brought it to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, no, it's sovereign territory. The Cherokee Nation can make its own laws and decide who comes in, who goes out. They can control their borders.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember what the plurality was, but that was what John Marshall said. And the famous quip that's misquoted, and I can't remember what the exact thing was, but what's the misquote, which carries the gist of what Jackson had to say, is Justice Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. In other words, the United States of America said, no, Georgia. And that is what you read about when you read about the Trail of Tears.
Right.
They removed the Cherokee Nation to Indian Territory, which is present-day Oklahoma. And of course, at the turn of the last century, even that was lost.
Right, exactly. And we can even get into that as well, because that still falls into the whole jurisdiction of Manifest Destiny, when you had well, they call themselves, because like the Cherokees wasn't the only one that actually went through the Trail of Tears. So, it was mostly the 5 civilized tribes. So you had the Cherokee go through it. You had the Seminoles go through it. You had the Choctaw. You had the Chickasaw. And I keep forgetting the last one. It was the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Seminole, and one more. Somebody help me out in the chat. If you want to go ahead and put in the last.
Seminole, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee. Seminole. Yes. So I named 4. Matter of fact, hold on, people. Let's consult the Oracle, Google. Let's see, 5 civilized tribes. Okay, Creek. The Creek. Mm-hmm. Yes. But let's go back. I want to go back to the first time that we actually hear the doctrine of discovery itself specifically mentioned in Supreme Court law, and in a Supreme Court case, and that was actually in 1823. It was matter of fact, let me see. I can present my screen. Give me just one moment. Let's see. This is the here we go. Upstandard project. Okay. All right. I'm sharing my screen now, crew. If you want to go ahead and put that up for me, thank you. So in 1823 Supreme Court case, Johnson versus McIntosh, the doctrine of discovery became part of the U.S. federal law and was used to dispossess native peoples of their land. In a unanimous decision, that means all 9 of them said, yeah, Chief Justice John Marshall, Stephanie's friend, writes that the principle of discovery gave European nations an absolute right to New World lands and native peoples certain rights of occupancy. And what basically he was saying is that the United States in of itself, because it was based on an European nation principle through the doctrine of discovery, gave them the right, an absolute right to those lands. And it was okay to take native lands away from indigenous people because the papal bulls said so. Damn. Stephanie, let me ask you something. Mm-hmm. Do you think that I can use the doctrine of discovery to discover your car keys and just take them because God said it was okay for me to possess them?
I don't know. I don't have that high-speed internet access to the Pope. I'd have to ask the Pope. But probably not, Cynthia. No, probably not.
What about Can the doctrine of discovery say that I can just go and just go to your house, take your house keys and just possess them and just say that I have the right through the doctrine of discovery just to take your house?
All right. Well, we're leaving out one step. Am
Mm.
I a Christian? Or
Mm. No, but you're not a Christian. So
then
if
you can. Then
okay.
absolutely you can. You can do anything you want as long as I don't confess the,
Right, right.
as long as I don't confess the faith.
Yes.
And in
Right,
English
right.
doctrine,
Exactly.
it
Uh
turned from "Are you a Christian?" to "Are you white?"
white. That's right. So I probably would not
Are
have.
you, what is your descent? Are you European?
Mhm. Mhm.
This is
Exactly.
the roots. The roots of this
Mhm.
are first in Christianity, and then when particularly English, and maybe we can get into Barbados, which is where the locus of this began
Mhm. Yeah,
in the English settlement of
yeah,
North America.
let's get into it. Geez, I wish that Phil was here. He's age and
He
maybe if
is.
we
He'd be right on top of this business. He
yeah,
really
if we
would.
start, maybe if we can invoke the spirit of Phil, if we all start singing Rihanna songs, but no, that's okay. We won't do that because we don't want to get any copyright strikes.
No, we
Um,
don't want to do that.
no, we don't want to do that. But yeah,
Bad
you
for the
want to.
channel.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, by the way, everybody, Skeptic Haven is monetized, so please think about giving to the super chat. We you can actually do it right down there. And so give us a little money so that we can keep on bringing you these
Think
interesting conversations. Thank
think
you.
you can help with a Patreon too, I
That is
believe.
correct. That is
I think you
correct. You can
can.
also
I
be,
think there's all sorts of ways.
patreon.com backslash Skeptic Haven. Just saying.
Yeah,
Okay,
there you go.
back to
Think about
discussion.
it.
Think about it. Do it
All right.
if you're
Well,
able. If you're
yeah,
able.
yeah. If you're
Yes.
I- if
So
you want to jump into it a little bit, because now we're getting into it. Now
yeah,
we're getting into the stuff, and I actually have a personal connection to this, which is
yeah.
to my
Let's talk about
shame.
that. Yeah.
But
Well,
I just want to show
yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
this little thing here. Uh, this is an article on Barbados.
Hmm.
The development of a plantation economy and African slavery in Carolina began before English colonists even settled Charlestown in 1670. In
Hmm.
1663, 8 Lord Proprietors of England received land grants in North America from Charles II for their loyalty to the monarchy during the English Civil War. The Lords, and this is another issue, politics and religion,
Right.
just like now,
Yes.
were deeply intertwined.
That's right.
The Lords decided to combine their shares to establish a profit-seeking proprietary settlement in Carolina between the English colony of Virginia and Spanish Florida. To ensure financial success, they sent representatives to study the lucrative sugar plantation system on the Caribbean island of Barbados. They also recruited white settlers from this English West Indian colony to help launch their new North American settlement. Now, little break. Now we're going to talk economics here.
Yeah.
The Spanish found gold. The Portuguese didn't really do too much with Brazil. The Spanish found gold and silver, enough to monetize the Spanish Empire for decades and decades and decades. They didn't. They were the wealthiest nation on Earth because of their discovery of silver and gold, particularly in the Peruvian in Peru, uh, and a little bit in Mexico. New Spain, they called it. The English didn't find that. The English had nothing in their discoveries. You, first of all, the people that settled New England were people that basically wanted to get the hell out of England. Why? because Charles II was restored. You were talking about that the English fought a civil war to kick out a Catholic monarch and to preserve English Protestantism, the English independence from the Pope.
Is that during the War of the Roses? If I
No, the War of the Roses was long, long before.
Oh,
Long,
okay,
long
okay.
before.
I will shut up now. Go ahead.
Yeah, Oliver Cromwell and Parliament executed King Charles I. There was a huge civil war in the 40s and 50s, and Charles II, referred to earlier in this thing, was restored to the throne because Oliver Cromwell was, his battlefield success can only go so far, and he started losing shit, and he was not a very nice guy either. So they say, "Yeah, well, let's have the king back." So Charles II comes in, grants a thing. Where do they go to discover to study how to make the colonies pay? They go to Barbados. Why do they go to Barbados? Because my ancestor, William Vassall, and his brother had figured out how to make a buck. They had already figured out how to make a buck. William Vassall was one of the proprietors of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and had a whole bunch of back and forth between the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Plymouth Colony, and he had a relative who was sitting in Parliament, and there was all of this stuff. Eventually, he winds up with his brother Samuel, I believe it was, in Barbados, and these two put together the English Middle Passage and established the slave trade that
So this
provided the workforce to grow the
Mhm.
incredibly lucrative crop of sugarcane.
Sugarcane. So this is the time period where we actually had the English starting to ramp up its involvement with the slave trade, even though like the transatlantic slave trade was established before the English got involved, because like we're talking about um this I would say like the transatlantic slave trade was shortly built after Columbus coming to what is it called, San Salvador? Not San Salvador. Yeah, San Salvador, right? Hispaniola? Hispaniola.
Hispaniola,
Well,
yeah.
Hispaniola. And basically, and then we had the last intercetera of 1493, which basically blessed having the slave trade, right? And I know that like the first part of trying to monetize, I would say, the New World with slaves were the indigenous people, but a lot of them either ran away or
Or
died because of the European diseases, especially smallpox, that was brought over from the European nations. So then we had the Portuguese specifically, who were starting to bring over labor from the African continent. I believe that the first slaves were taken from Angola, if I'm not mistaken. And then after, and it's kind of funny. This is an interesting story. I was listening to a podcast specifically about where did the whole notion of getting slaves from the African continent come about. So apparently, Portuguese traders were kidnapped or stolen some people from Angola, and they were going to use them for slave labor in the New World. Those slaves, I believe, were of a more of an elite class within their tribes, and made a deal with the Portuguese traders that if they let them go, that they'll get them more slaves from from not only from Angola but from other nations that were on the western coast of Africa. And that is basically how we kind of got into the idea of other elite classes of, African business people, also monarchs and kings and queens and things of that nature, actually being involved and working with Europeans to take human commodity from the African continent, especially from the western coast, and also central and parts of Central Africa, because Congo was a part of that as well, to bring over human commodity over to the New World. And but like with your people, this by blood, not by philosophy or thought, we
Right, right.
have we basically have the idea or the wherewithal to bring forward the to actually take or get involved with the African slave trade.
Yep.
Hmm. It's so
Well, yeah, and see, the English were looking at the Portuguese, and they were looking at the Spaniards, and they were
yeah,
saying, "How do we get in on the action?" Because these
exactly.
countries, Iberia's getting fabulously rich. We're
Hmm.
going to get left behind. How are we going to build our ships?
Right.
How are we going to do this stuff?
How are
How are
we
we going
going
to
to
keep
be Hail Britannia? Britannia rules the waves.
right?
Britain will never, ever, ever shall be slaves. How do we
Yeah,
do
yeah.
that?
Well, they're they had to deal with the Scottish first, but
Oh,
they
okay.
kind of did that. But
Yeah.
that's all. They kind of did that with
Mm.
King James, but that had already happened by now. So yeah, now it is Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, but anyway, yeah. So they're sitting there. The British are sitting there going, "How are we? Here is a model for economic success
Mm-hmm.
with our global competitors. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
this is the revival of a global world, a global world economy. In terms of Europeans, they're thinking in terms of competing with the players in the whole thing.
Right.
Even when you go into the history of the British East India Company, it was still a question of, well, the Portuguese had their settlement in Goa. How do the British get into the thing? The British East India Company was an independent company, and India was actually conquered by a company. It
Mm.
was a corporate takeover of
Wow.
land.
That's
Uh,
crazy.
Yeah. So but this is not the case in the Americas. In the
Mm-hmm.
Americas, this is all under the control of the crown or of the of Parliament,
Right.
in particularly in the 17th century.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, this is in we're talking about 1663 and the founding of Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
It goes on. Sugarcane never became a major cash crop in Carolina, but these Barbadians eventually transplanted their West Indian model of plantations and slavery to the new colony.
Mm.
And initially, low country planters attempted and failed to develop a cash crop from olives, grapes, mulberry trees, different English-based grains. Carolina settlers also engaged with in the fur trade with American Indians, extracted tar and pitch for naval stores, and raised livestock. But, however, low country planters had successfully applied by 1690. However, low country planters had successfully applied the West Indian plantation model to rice,
Mm.
and Carolina rapidly developed into a lucrative plantation economy and slave society.
Mm.
Now we get back to Barbados.
Yes.
An overview of the early colonial history of Barbados provides context for why this English West Indian colony was so influential in the development of plantation economies in the Low Country and throughout the English North America. In the late 17th and 18th century, Barbados was an ideal place to recruit settlers who could promote the Lords Proprietors' commercial interests in Carolina. By the 1660s and 70s, this relatively small Caribbean island featured the most lucrative trading system in the English colonies. It was the prize of the English colonies. not Mass Bay, not Plymouth, not Virginia, certainly not the Carolinas. They're just getting started. Barbados, those islands. And that economy was based on expendable Africans.
Right.
After the English settled Barbados in 1627, they quickly began cultivating different crops to find a lucrative. They want money. These guys aren't doing it for fun. They want money.
That's right.
As a
Cream.
coral island, much of the land in Barbados is flat and sloped and arable, in contrast to the more mountainous volcanic islands elsewhere in the Caribbean. In addition, in the early 17th century, the island was reportedly uninhabited, kind of, sort of. Though Amerindian groups had a long history of occupying Barbados, conflicts between those groups and prior encounters with Spanish settlers, explorers, and European diseases had nearly wiped out their numbers before the English arrived. In contrast, other English colonies in the Caribbean, such as Antigua and St. Kitts, continually struggled with attacks from Amerindian inhabitants, which delayed settlers' attempts to develop plantation economies. Geographically set apart at the eastern extremity of the Caribbean island chain, English settlers in Barbados could avoid conflicts with both European rivals. Remember, Spain is there too. Spain is in Hispaniola. Spain is in Cuba. Spain's all around the place.
That's right. Spain was in Jamaica.
And the Dutch are there. You know,
right.
the Dutch are hanging around.
Drinking coffee.
So, yes. And,
eating chocolate. All that.
So the colony of Barbados, first. In the first few decades of settlement, the Barbadian labor force consisted primarily of white indentured servants, convicts, and Barbados, or kidnapped, workers from Scotland, Ireland, and England. Indentured servants. Barbadian settlers used this mixed labor force to cultivate cash crops such as tobacco, cotton, and indigo on small to medium-sized landholding, but they struggled to find a successful export. In addition, labor conditions were extreme and oppressive, and indentured servants protested their treatment on the island through riots in 1634 and 1649. The colony of Barbados continued to struggle financially until the 1640s, when the Portuguese expelled Dutch traders, Dutch, and Sephardic Jews from northern Israel during a civil war. These settlers returned to the English West Indian colonies for new trade markets. They particularly looked to Barbados to cultivate sugar for the booming European market and encourage a consumer base for their connections to the transatlantic slave trade in West and Central Africa. As the easternmost Caribbean island in the Lesser Antilles, Barbados was ideally situated to become a port. So it had the land, it had the location, and it had the talent, and it had the money of the lords, and an entryway to American trade systems. European sugar consumption also grew tremendously in the 18th century. New Barbadian sugar planters as well as traders became immensely wealthy. The sugar revolution transformed Barbados from a colony of small landholdings into an entirely deforested island covered in plantations, worked by enslaved Africans, and owned by a handful of elites. Which brings us to this guy. This guy will just go on his political stuff. William and Samuel are among the original patentees of the Massachusetts Bay Company. These are the Puritans who settled New England. They were the settlers of the land around Boston, 1629, 1630. John Winthrop, Shining City on a Hill. They came over on that boat, on the Arabella. He and his brother were the money guys. So they start there. Then he goes back to England for provisions, and then comes back to America and settles in the lands controlled by the Plymouth colony. And he had disputes with John Winthrop and people in the Plymouth colony on the issue of religious practice and freedom. So they went back and forth, and there's a whole thing. But eventually, whereas he gets the hell out of here. There's a bit of his sojourn in Maine. So he's in the 1640s. He's getting embroiled in all these controversies in New England, and he goes back to London in 1647 and has a thing. And they mentioned Vassal's daughter Judith Winslow. Edward Winslow was the governor of the Plymouth colony. It wasn't it actually stepdaughter, because Judith was that's kind of sort of. Winslow was married the widow of White, I believe, a White, and their kid was this guy, by the way, is my 8th great grandfather. The guy that his daughter married is my 7th.
Mm-hmm. All up in the family.
Yeah, so it's because, and Judith was my 7th great grandmother. These again, we're talking about people here. All of these people know each other. All of these things are tied together. The people, the politics, the whole thing. And now finally, slave plantation, Barbados, 1648 to 1656. And William, I believe, died in 1656. So he just sort of saw a good investment. Brothers William and Samuel Vassall invested in nearly all aspects of English Atlantic colonization during the first half of the 17th century. Boston, Plymouth, now Barbados. Samuel Vassall financed ships running the Middle Passage and was a major shareholder of the Guinea Company, founded to supply enslaved labor to the colonies. By early 1648, William Vassall moved to Barbados to take advantage of the global sugar boom, which we were just talking about. He purchased land in St. Michael and the people who work at it. From that point, the family built its wealth by running slave labor plantations in the Caribbean, not just on Barbados, also in Jamaica and various other places. The Vassall's family life in St. Michael's was one of lavish magnificence, although the people they enslaved were subjected to the crudest of conditions. English visitors to their homes reported being shocked that the slaves who waited on the tables loaded in silver plate wore the scantiest of clothing, and that often in tatters. Sugar slavery was hugely profitable, despite being one of the most deadly forms of slavery ever invented. And this is the system that the people in the Carolinas went to study because of its unbelievably profitable return.
Yeah. And the crazy thing about it too, Stephanie, if we even think about it, because there's always this argument about, oh, well, that was such a long time ago, right? That happened. You're talking about your 8th grade grandfather. Eighth grade grandfather. And he established that back in the 1600s. I said, yeah, but you have sugar plantations that was moving all the way from the 1600s past the 1833, when you had slavery supposedly abolished in England, but you still had other people coming over from India, from Germany, from Ireland, from China to the Caribbean islands to work these plantations. And you also even had a migrant population after that time period, even after 1865, that was moving over from the Caribbean. A lot of Jamaicans actually came through migrant farming in the 20s, the turn of the century, and the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, to work sugarcane plantations and sharecropping right here in the United States South. And you know the reason why I know that, Stephanie? You know why I know that? I didn't read it.
I don't. But you
I
can
didn't read
tell
it.
me.
I'm about to tell you, because my
Good.
grandfather was one of them.
There you go.
My mother, on my mother's side, that's how my grandfather got to the United States. He was a migrant sharecropper in Mississippi. Came over in 1943 from Westmoreland, Jamaica. Landed on the coast of Louisiana and worked for 2 years on a sugarcane plantation right here in the United States. And before he went back to Jamaica, and then came back and then landed in New York in 1945. So the thing about all of this is that when we're having these discussions about three papal bulls, three pieces of written documentation from two popes, Nicholas V and I keep forgetting that man's name.
Alexander the Sixth.
Alexander the Sixth. I was about to go back into my notes and go back to it. Yes, so Nicholas V and Alexander the Sixth, their words set all of this stuff in motion to the point that we are still dealing with the ethical implications and also and also how it has shaped modern society. It has shaped law.
The modern globe.
It shaped the modern globe.
This has shaped everything. I mean, these same doctrines were essential pieces of apartheid.
Right.
And what we're talking about here, this is an example of what a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is about.
Right.
You can't have reconciliation without truth.
That's right.
And everybody needs to share that. Mm-hmm. But there also needs to be a recognition that this was done.
Right.
A lot of that money is in the treasury of the Catholic Church now.
That's right.
Is in the treasury of the Bank of England.
Yes.
The vassals built the house that houses the president of Harvard University today.
That's right.
That money is still with us. I don't have any of it because
I don't either.
That side of the family, they're, the Barbadians, the vassals. There's a town in Maine, like I said, named Vassalboro, because he had ties to the settlement of Maine back in the day too, because he had his fingers in so many pies. But there's a connection,
right?
And I don't. It's one of the things that. Well, I guess ancestry has something to do with it, but a lot of people just don't. I mean, what do I came here from Italy, and my parents came here, and my parents came here from Italy in the 1890s. What do I have to do with any of this?
Yeah.
Guess where Italy got its money from? Who are the beneficiaries of this of a global transfer of wealth?
Hey,
from the global south to the global north.
Hello, Italian immigrants. Where is the Vatican located, honey? Where's the Vatican located?
And I'm not trying to shit on anybody, but this is world history. This is not.
This kind of goes back to like the whole conversation when we're talking about redress, repair, and also and even if we're talking about reparations. So I mean, that's a favorite conversation of mine. But like some people like, well, are you just talking about African Americans here in the United States? I'm like, no. I mean, like I said, now I will say that reparations in of itself is owed to several different groups of people all throughout the world, and it's different entities that should be paying up to not only tell the truth, but to reconcile, to redress, and to reconcile, and to attempt to repair a harm that has been done to people who have been subjugated by different laws that were put into place with the running of the doctrine of discovery in the first place. Okay.
Right.
Now, how that's going to look is going to be very different depending on what country you're talking about, and also which entity that we're discussing that did the harm. But we cannot actually just like throw it over the shoulder to say that this is not something that should be talked about. You are very correct when we are talking about redress and repair, we got to talk about the truth. We have to talk about, the different parts of our very ugly history that brought us here. Like I even mentioned, like I mentioned the McIntosh versus was it crap McIntosh versus Johnson in
Mhm.
1823, that basically that was cited, that the doctrine of discovery was cited by John Marshall, saying that the that basically that the entities or the Europeans that at that particular time had the right to actually to take and possess native lands because of the doctrine of discovery, and Manifest Destiny actually got its language from the Doctrine of Discovery. And then we even go all the way up to the 21st century. The United States Supreme Court in 2005, relying on a series of Indian law cases going back to 1823, specifically cited the doctrine in its decision denying the rights of the Oneida Indian Nation of New York to regain its territory. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote in the 2005 decision, under the doctrine of discovery, fee title to the land occupied by Indians when the colonists arrived vested in their sovereign, first discovering European nations and later original states and the United States. And I know that people will love to all hail Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but she has a sort of past. I'm just saying, quiet as a cat, Stephanie, we may have to do a show on Miss Bader Ginsburg, but that's going further down the line. But so we are, but all that's to say is that our laws, the political state that we are in right now, and even how we have set up our system in order for us to be able to capitalize and monetize the different things that we do, all go back to this doctrine of discovery. All of it. It all
And
it,
it,
it all
and it,
goes
and
back
it,
to it.
and it goes back to the way the way it was interpreted, the cultures of the various people that were of the various nations that benefited from it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if you're interested, on there's a book by a Barbadian guy, Hillary McDonald, I think McD.
Mm-hmm.
I could be Mackenzie. I don't know. It's McD something. Could be McDonald. Could be. Well,
You're
McD. It
not.
wouldn't be
Are you sure
Mackenzie,
it's
would
not?
it?
You sure it's not Hillary Beckles?
It is Hillary Beckles.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, it was Hillary Beckles. Yeah.
Yeah, and
He
and
he works a lot about. He's really big into the whole conversation about history and reparations, especially, and that's where he's from
yes,
Barbados. Yeah.
he's from Barbados, and
Mm-hmm.
and and it's really interesting. The book is very, very interesting. The thing about Barbados is that the crown actually very recently acknowledged that there was something due
Yeah.
Barbados.
Yeah. Yeah. Charles, King Charles did. Matter of
Right.
fact, he after not too long after he did his whole, I'm gonna wear the crown now because my mama did. He been waiting for a long time.
Yeah, they do that, don't they?
Yeah, well, hey, that's how he got the crown, because his mama did. She kicked the bucket, pushed up the daisies, and now we got a new monarch. There you go. Anywho, he
Yeah.
did state that he supported a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to study the effects that England had, and their role in the transatlantic slave trade, and also in colonization. Like he said that, and I was thinking to myself, and I think this is before, because like I know that wasn't he recently diagnosed with cancer, or he was being treated for cancer, if I'm not mistaken?
don't know. That could very well be.
Yeah, I know that.
He's been in the forefront of this discussion for a very,
Right.
very long time.
Right. And maybe he feels guilty and about, certain things, and so he feels like that he wants to make up and atone for stuff. Okay, I'm really okay with your guilt, sir. As long as you do the right thing and actually,
Yeah.
do and do the commission and push Parliament to actually create laws and also create ways to do reconciliation when it comes to reparations owed to certain peoples that England colonized and caused much damage and harm. But I want but before we actually go towards the end, I wanted to talk about the Catholic Church specifically and how it has recently repudiated the doctrine of discovery. Let me see. I'm going to pull this up. This is from the conversation. I'm going to present my screen in just one moment. Let's see. Share screen. And this is, here we go. Okay. All right. So we can go ahead and put that up for me, please. Thank you. So, according to the conversation, it says it has been more than 500 years since the Vatican decrees gave European colonizers permission to carve up the New World, and just one since Pope Francis disavowed them. On March 30th, 2023, Francis repudiated the doctrine of discovery, a set of ideas the Spanish and the Portuguese in particular used to justify seizing land that they had discovered and colonizing indigenous people in the land that they came to call the Americas. The Vatican statement not only rejected the doctrine, but also apologized for historical atrocities carried out by Christians and affirmed the rights and cultural values of indigenous people. The repudiation can hardly undo centuries of oppressing indigenous people and stealing their lands, yet the statement is monumental in ways that signal cultural and political shifts within the Catholic Church. It recognizes decades of work by indigenous Catholics to demand that their very own church respect their history, culture, and faith. Let's see. And yeah, and so it starts to go into, like, the history of the different
I
papal.
have the actual statement on my
Yeah, go ahead.
screen.
Pull it up.
And it's really interesting to read it. Going to primary documents is always kind of cool because
Hmm.
if you compare and contrast Inter Cetra and
Hmm.
and this proclamation
Yeah,
of which is not, it's a joint statement. It's not a papal bull.
right.
Doesn't have the same sort of ex cathedra pronunciation. Okay, you can go enslave the goddamn world if you want to,
And it's
and
not in Latin.
yeah.
Darn.
But anyway, it's curious to me. Point two: infidelity is the mandate received from Christ. Of course, it's like they're doing the same thing. It's the same language, even though
I
it's not.
know.
It's English, not Latin.
I
Received from
know.
Christ. The Catholic Church strives to promote universal fraternity and respect for the dignity of every human being. For this reason, in the course of history, the popes have condemned acts of violence, oppression, social injustice, and slavery, including those committed against indigenous people. There have been also numerous examples of bishops, priests, blah, blah. Oh, we died too. It's like, yeah, but you made it possible.
Yeah.
You made it possible. In our own day, renewed dialogue with indigenous peoples, especially with those who profess the Catholic faith, has helped the church to understand better their abilities. It took you long enough, 1493 to 2023.
A little bit about 500 years. That's all. That's all.
500 years it took
Mm.
them to say, hey, we fucked up with that one big
Yep.
time.
Yep.
When almost to the day. This is fucking crazy. The 3rd of March.
Yeah.
Almost to the day, the 30th of March, almost to the fucking day
Yeah.
that Inter Cetra was proclaimed by the Pope.
Yeah. Yeah. Shout out to
And point 6, this is where they repudiate it. They say, the doctrine of discovery is not part of the teaching of the Catholic Church.
I'm sorry. That was
No.
irony. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's historical research clearly demonstrates that the papal documents in question, written in it, this is the bullshit that people go, "Oh, that they want to. Oh, it's a different day and time. It's a
Right.
different historical period,
Right.
and linked to political questions. When was slavery right? Vatican seemed like it was okay when you wrote it 500 years ago.
Yeah.
At the same time, the church acknowledges that these papal bulls did not adequately reflect the equal dignity and rights of the indigenous people. Of course not. At the
No
time,
shit.
at the time, you didn't accord the actual inhabitants of fucking Europe
Right.
with rights and dignity. You consider them subjects of their Christian princes
Mm.
who served by the grace of God.
Mm.
I mean, you know, in certain terms, the Church's magisterium upholds the respect due every human being. The Catholic Church therefore repudiates those concepts that fail to recognize the inherent human rights of indigenous peoples, including what has become known as the legal and political doctrine of discovery, in inverted commas.
I
So,
like to say this two things. Yes, Alma, I am allergic to bullshit. It gives me hives. And secondly, I like to address something that's in the chat where it was said that it may have taken 500 years, but things are getting better today than they were, with humanist values leading Christianity by the nose. I would that there's arguments against that, Mr. Tails. But at the same time, I would say this: it should have never happened in the first place. It should have never happened in the first place. If we are to tout that Christianity is a civilized religion, and that the people who are in charge have been placed there by God through Christ Jesus. And as Stephanie have aptly pointed out, they have a fiber optic cable to heaven itself in order for them to be able to actually accurately say what thus saith the Lord. And if God is so loving and so kind and so just and so all the things, don't Jehovah this and Jehovah that, then Jehovah should have not said to Alexander the Sixth nor Nicholas the Fifth that it was okay for them to say it's okay to subjugate Africans, it's okay to subjugate indigenous people, it's okay to take lands that don't belong to you, and it's okay for you to say that you discovered it. You that it never have been a thing in the first place. So I reject that premise of about those values leading Christianity. It may lead some Christians, but I would say that Christianity in of itself has a long way to go before it actually starts to embrace humanist values. And we can even say that nowadays Christianity has been infected even by patriarchy and also nationalism, to the point that we are even having some of the same kind of BS that ruled in the day of the Portuguese, the Dutch, and also the English, that is showing up in our political society today. So, this is really just to lay the foundation, Stephanie, that the stuff that we are dealing with now, the stuff like Project 2025, the stuff that we are hearing from the Heritage Foundation, the different series of laws that are coming out from different states that's saying it's okay to display the 10 Commandments on public school classrooms. Even though that you may have other people from different space, and that's a slap in the face of the establishment clause. We don't do it any damn way because we discovered this shit. It didn't got come from nowhere. It didn't come out of this. It just didn't come out of the blue. This has been things that have been established way before you have come on this earth, before I have come on this earth, and before the United States was even a nation. You know, so
One thing,
yeah.
one thing that's striking me now. Go finish your thought, and then I've got a few last thoughts to.
No, I know I was just saying that, like, there's a role to play for the ones who actually still cowside to these thoughts of, of the doctrine of discovery. And basically these are the paper bulls that have put into writing the foundations of white supremacy. And we're still
Correct.
fighting this particular notion of this, and to this day. But go ahead, say your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that I think it's important to recognize items like this, like looking at the source documents. Where did these things come from? Where looking at the ideas that, standing in contrast to these ideas of the 16th century and 17th century, there were other ideas percolating at the time that uh, that indicated a different strain in thought, especially standing in contravention to these ideas of sovereignty,
Mm-hmm.
of the sovereign and the subject. Those ideas are embodied in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
They come from the thinking of men who were living alongside the men and women who established the slave colony of Barbados. And while those thoughts did have an impact in the minds of the wealthy planter of Virginia that put them down on paper, they did not have an impact on his pocketbook
Yeah.
or his own personal morals. They were good to say and they were good to think. But this is where the tension between thought and progress stands, when the contravening notions of economic organization stand in conflict with them, with the notion of citizenry, with the notion of humanity, with the notion of if you even want to put it into the terms of a deist god, or even a creator god. The brotherhood or the siblinghood of man is after all uh, a concept that is expressed in the Bible, but also is the declaration to please go slay those pesky Amalekites.
Mm.
So that
Mm-hmm.
there are these tensions that we all have, with the people have been struggling with for as long as there have been people. And the thing that I think is very, very key for humanists and secularists and religious people of goodwill have to reckon with is that tension.
Right.
And
Yeah.
there's no real hardship in acknowledging that certain things are wrong, always will be wrong, and always have been wrong.
Right.
And that we are very, very good at making excuses for not putting them right.
That's
But
right.
we have the capacity to do so.
That's right. You said it. Well put. Well put. And I think that another thing that we have to do as we are continuing to exist as a society is decide what kind of people we want to be. Do we want
That's
to
right.
be a people who hold these particular notions where we are othering others in order to place them in a certain area of subjugation, as and then say that God told me that it's okay? Or Do we want to be a society that's basing our morals and ethics on creating a, a community around well-being? And I would definitely say that the doctrine of discovery did the very opposite. But what do you all think? I see that there's a few people that have been chiming in the comments. We would love for you all to like and share this video. We would also love for you all to comment in the comment section below the video, and definitely keep the conversation going, including how do we as a society, as a global citizenry. I don't think I said that's right. Citizenship. As a global citizenship. Let's just say that. Actually come together and talk about how we can right these wrongs and how it can show up in depending on the nations that we happen to reside. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. And
Me too.
yeah, and guys, you all should tune in. We were just in the back channel. We're going to have a special guest on the 27th, I believe, of July with Lynn Darren, where we're going to be talking about Project 2025. I just bulldozed my way on that show, so make sure that you guys tune in again. I'm like, yeah, I need to be on that show. I'm just telling you. And, and Stephanie, I hope that you can come back for that one too. And
if I'm invited, I'll be here. But these are important subjects, and
they are.
and indeed, this conversation has been a great one to have,
Yes.
especially looking at the source documents, especially talking about the deep history of this stuff,
Yes.
because history is not dead.
Right.
It lives on in so many institutions that we can't really understand until we really appreciate where this stuff didn't just spring up out of nowhere.
Exactly. It didn't.
It sprung up out of something.
Right.
So in order to redress the wrongs that have been done, we don't all have to be retributive.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be distributive.
Right.
We need to have these conversations and then figure out how not to fuck this up again.
Correct. I agree.
Let's don't go backwards.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go forwards. Let's don't fuck it up again.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make it better?
Right. And you need to think about it, Stephanie. That's what all these book bans are about.
Right.
That's where where also the bastardizing of history is coming from, and calling it critical race theory and woke and anti-wokeness, basically saying that we're going to take all this stuff out just because we don't want to face our history, because it'll make little Timmy and little Jenny feel bad. And I'm like, well, little Daquan feels bad about it too. How about that? We all feel bad about it. But how do we reconcile the past if we don't know anything about it, so that we don't repeat it in the future, and that we can repair the people that are still being affected by it today? Like the doctrine of discovery is still being felt 500 years later. It was just cited in a in a Supreme Court case in 2005 by a Supreme Court justice that died, what, about 3 or 4 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people wake up. I feel like Dap from like school days.
I feel you. I believe me. I feel you.
Like, wake up! Bless me right now. I'm just saying, like, really, like, I need you all to, and that's why I never call myself like an expert in history. I am a student of history, and I do love history.
I am a student of history.
Yes,
as well.
I'm definitely a student of history. And that's why I love doing these shows with you, Stephanie, because we are of the same mind of loving history and talking about history and how history is actually affecting us today. And even discussing like some of the things that we can really focus on how to right the wrongs that history has written. But guys, listen, it's been a great one, a great discussion. Stephanie, thank you so much for this discussion and being on here. Thank you everybody for for being here to actually tune in live, and also being in the chat, talking and saying things that's on your mind, and also making a very lively conversation. Just want to give you all just a few things to discuss, to think about, and about what we are doing. So one of the first things that we have scrolling down at the bottom is don't forget to check out our other shows on Skeptic Haven. Tuesdays, the Secular Soapbox. Thursdays, the Sunny Spot. Saturday, the Global Atheist, and also Women Atheists Unload. And then Sundays is a call-in show called Let's Talk on Sunday. And guys, this is something that's very exciting. Starting this month, I believe Monday, we got a new show coming out called The Black Freethinkers at 7 Central Time. We got like some really cool people in the community that's going to be on that show. I'm looking so much forward to it. And yeah, I'll be on there too, guys. So make sure that you all are tuning in on Mondays at 7 Central Time, and welcome the Skeptic Haven Black Thinkers crew to the to Skeptic Haven, and we can continue to have these particular discussions. Also, we also want to tell you guys that if you like Skeptic Haven and you like the things that we do and you want to get involved, we are looking for volunteers. So if you are interested in volunteering with Skeptic Haven, we're looking specifically for producing, booking, and call screeners. So if you're interested, please contact us at wesdstudorvant@gmail.com. That's WESDSTURDEVANT@gmail.com. Now, guys, also too, we just want to let you know that even though we're on this platform, we do appreciate anything and everything that you can do. So again, if you do appreciate the work that we do here at Skeptic Haven, please consider being a patron. You can go to patreon.com/Skeptic Haven, and you can join and actually support every episode that we do here at Skeptic Haven. And we also want to thank our current patrons that we have. We want to thank Puck, Helen Greene, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Eric Ozols, Rion, Deneen Murphy, Dan D, Michael Wiseman, Sunny Shell, Aaron Coalson, and Phil Calderone. And again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure that you all hook us up with a subscribe if you have not. Like this video, share this video, keep the conversation going. And with that being said, we will see you next time. You all have a good rest of your Saturday. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh- I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take sh- I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.